Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Long. I'm with Sustainable Essex, and I want to welcome you to our second in our 2021 seed series, Your Connecticut River and What You Can Do for Clean Waters and Thriving Communities. So welcome. We're glad that you were able to join us. I want to cover just a couple of quick logistics before we move forward with the presentation. Everyone was muted as you joined the meeting, and we're going to ask that you remain muted. We are recording this event. There will be time for your questions at the end of the presentation. We'll ask that you submit those questions via chat. And there will be a resource packet that will send to all of those who have registered for this event. We'll hope to get that out within a couple of days or so. That will include a link to the recording of this event, as well as links to other resources. Also, before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the very generous financial support that we've received for our 2021 season. First of all, we received very, very generous support from our harvest supporters. Those individuals are Frank Hall and another anonymous donor, and those two folks provided some very generous donations during our crowdfunding campaign. And I also want to acknowledge the great support of the Sustainable Connecticut Community Match Fund. They matched on a one-for-one basis the money that we raised through our community crowdfunding campaign. And if it were not for the financial support from both our harvest supporters, the Community Match Fund, and frankly, everyone who donated during our crowdfunding campaign, these seed events would not be possible. So we really appreciate all that support. I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to move into the presentation now, and I'd like to introduce Kelsey Wentling. Kelsey is with the Connecticut River Conservancy. She is the Connecticut River Steward for the part of the river that runs through Connecticut. She's been a great supporter of Sustainable Essex. Our committee is involved with the Conservancy and Kelsey specifically on a number of significant projects that you're going to hear a lot more about later on this summer. So with that, Kelsey, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and I'll turn this over to you.
All right, thank you. And a big thanks to Mike and everyone at Sustainable Essex. You said we've been great supporters of you, and I really have to say the same. I think you've done a really good job of helping us get the word out there and reach new folks, especially in Essex. So thanks for having me here today. And as you mentioned, I'm here to talk about the Connecticut River and how folks can participate for clean water and thriving communities. So I'll specifically be talking about volunteer opportunities, why we do them, and how you can get involved. Some of these volunteer opportunities are ongoing. Some have passed for the year, but will come back around next year. And some are upcoming later this summer or this fall. So with that, I'll get started, and you may recognize this area here. This is actually taken at sunrise out on the Connecticut River, where we do water quality monitoring right when the sun rises, and the view is worth the early morning. So just briefly, before I get started, I do want to talk a little bit about our organization and the Connecticut River as a whole. So CRC, Connecticut River Conservancy, is the second oldest watershed nonprofit in the country. And that means we are the second oldest organization that works across an entire river valley. So we started in 1952, which is about 2 decades before major environmental legislation came to the federal level and before the EPA was even founded. We're membership based, so our work is driven or supported by grants and through our donors and members. And that work includes really a range of activities. So I've included some here, but this is by no means a comprehensive list of what we do. So for advocacy, I do review permits. Whenever something's happening down in the lower river in Essex, I get a notification and read through it. But we also do legislative advocacy to promote sustainable legislation at the state and sometimes federal level. We monitor for water quality, invasive species, monitor the health of the river and its tributaries, and we involve volunteers in that through our community science programs. And then increasingly, we're working to open up access to the river. Sometimes that means physical access, so helping people get into boats or get onto trails so that they can experience the river ecosystem. But there are other barriers to access, like costs or language, and so we work to either remove or mitigate those barriers. Restoration. So over the course of the last 200 years, humans have really quite significantly changed our ecosystems, and not always for the better. So some of our work includes restoring natural ecosystems to promote the general health of the river environment. And then lastly, I've included here our source to sea cleanup, which I'll also talk about later, but it's sort of a unique thing in that it's a big event for us, in which we engage a lot of different volunteers and partners to clean trash out of the river. And I do like to give an overview of the Connecticut River because I think the name is a little deceiving. Oftentimes, if you go up into Vermont or New Hampshire, folks may not even know that the Connecticut River reaches all the way up there. And similarly, I think sometimes we put our Connecticut blinders on and it's easy to forget about our neighbors to the north. So the Connecticut River is actually the longest river, the biggest river in all of New England. It's 410 miles, and it starts right up here at the border of Canada and New Hampshire at Fourth Lake, Connecticut. And then it winds down through Vermont, New Hampshire, Western Mass, and into central Connecticut. And all the water in the state of Connecticut eventually does drain. So all the rainwater, snowmelt does drain into Long Island Sound. But the Connecticut River is responsible for 70% of that. So 70% of the fresh water that makes it to the Sound comes from the Connecticut River, which is why we then care about what happens in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And I think for some folks, the term watershed is second nature or household term, but I do like to review that too. So here in this blue shaded area is an outline of the Connecticut River watershed. And this simply means that all the water on the surface of the land, so tributary rivers and streams, rain, snowmelt, you name it, that will all eventually drain to one common point. In this case, the Connecticut River and Long Island Sound. You can have subwatersheds. So in Essex, a subwatershed would be the Falls River, all that water that drains into the Falls River, and then the Connecticut River. And this is really a core tenet of our work because already here we see that nature has defined its own boundaries through different topographical features. One of our great challenges, though, is that we humans have come and superimposed 4 different state borders over this natural border. And so now we have disparate policies and cultures and regulations between 4 states, but our natural resources, so the animals and plants that live in the river, the water quality, these things don't change from state to state. If you're a fish migrating from Connecticut up to Massachusetts and the water quality standards change, that seems a little bit backwards. We don't recognize those same state borders. Similarly, if you dump pollutants into the river up in Massachusetts, those don't just stop when you get into Connecticut. So we try and reconcile these differences between state borders to manage the watershed on its own natural scale, which becomes even a little bit more complicated when you zoom in to the municipal level. So I think, can't quite remember, but I think there's something like 40, somewhere in the 40s, towns and cities in the Connecticut portion of the watershed, each with their own values and culture and town ordinances. So working to make sure that we can have consistency throughout these is really central to our work. All right, I talked a little bit about our different work buckets, I guess. And so now I'll go through a couple of different opportunities we have. And one is focused on migratory fish monitoring. So just as a high-level overview, a lot of fish species spend most of their life in a marine ecosystem and then only come up into freshwater rivers to spawn. These are called anadromous fish. And two that we spend a lot of time thinking about are alewife and blueback herring. They both fall within the river herring family. And because they're very similar in appearance and behavior, we kind of tend to group them together under river herring. But this also includes American shad. They're slightly bigger fish, and people in Connecticut in particular tend to be very familiar with shad because for many, many decades, shad were a really cultural centerpiece for people who came to fish and live along the river. As is probably not a surprise, I mentioned earlier, humans have been developing this land now for quite a while in a way that has not always considered all parts of our ecosystems. So these graphs here are showing the number of fish that go up and over a dam in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So the Holyoke Dam is the first major impediment to fish passage on the Connecticut River. In Connecticut, we don't have any major hydroelectricity dams, which is great. But once you get into Massachusetts, these fish can't just, hop right over that dam. They need to go into a ladder to get that passage and then spawn upriver in the habitat there. So when we look at these, we see, quite low numbers here starting in the 70s when they started collecting these data. And then you see a spike here, kind of in the middle. And that's when they introduced things like fish ladders and fish lifts. So previously, the fish weren't even really going over. They might have been trucked over, but that helped the population quite a bit. And then you see again this drop, this decline. And even today, I realize these data are a little old, but even today we're in historically low levels for river herring and shad populations. And this is not unique to the Connecticut River. This is all along the East Coast. The primary reason we think this is the case is because this is when larger trawlers out in the ocean were introduced, and river herring often end up as bycatch. And so the fisheries, the fish populations off the coast became severely depleted, which impacts how many fish can actually get up into river to eventually spawn. But on top of that, I mentioned the impact of dams. So we never see as many fish go over a dam as you would without a dam. That's just, no matter how great the fish elevator you make is, it will never be as good as a free flowing river. But things have gotten a little bit better. So even though we used to have millions of fish, we're at a temporary goal of reaching around 600,000. So in Holyoke, Massachusetts, we're not quite there. I think in the last couple of years, the average has been around 380,000 shad passing at the Holyoke Dam, which is better than it used to be, but still not where we want to be yet. And then as you get further upriver into Turner's Falls, some of these fish will head into different tributaries and begin to spawn. So the number is a little bit less just naturally. And then similarly for Vernon, Vermont, which is the next barrier on the river. However, a lot of these hydroelectricity facilities are going through a re-permitting process. And as part of this process, they need to redesign and reconsider how they're getting fish over, because this is what we want to see. This is the number of fish that should be going over these dams. And this is what we actually see. There are about, I think, 130,000 fish missing at the Turner's Falls that should be going up. It's far, far less. Same thing with Vernon. So we are already starting from a very low benchmark. And as we get further upriver, you can see it's not even close to how you would see in a restored ecosystem. So what do we do about it? This is where our volunteers come in. Part of the challenge here is that we have a significant data gap. So a lot of this data comes just from the fish lists, where they have someone counting the fish that go over. But we don't know the state of river herring in a lot of these smaller rivers. So what we do each spring, and this program just ended, but we do it every year, is we assign volunteers to different rivers in their area. So in Essex, we had several people going out to the Falls River. They would go 2 or 3 times per week from the middle of April through the beginning of June, and you just record presence and absence data. So we train you how to identify river herring, and then we ask our volunteers to say, did you see between 1 and 50, between 50 and 200? And that gives us information we share with the state and federal agencies, and they use this to supplement some of their own research work. And I'll be honest, for the most part, people are not seeing anything. We're seeing a lot of zeros. Some people get lucky and they see an abundance of fish, but the zeros are really important for us because this drives our priorities. We can show that we need improved infrastructure, that we need greater support to restore these populations. So this volunteer opportunity is actually a really great way to get to know your local river, get out there. And we got a lot of feedback that people just enjoyed, especially this year, the opportunity to get outside and make these connections with their local rivers and contribute valuable data. And the other primary migratory fish work we do is centered around sea lamprey. You may have seen or heard of sea lamprey. I have a deep love for them because they get a lot of hate. They're a very ugly fish. They're terrifying to look at. If you ever see one, it's kind of like seeing a face full of teeth, and they just get a bad rap, but they're a really important part of our ecosystem because they spend 7 years out at sea. And then once they've hit that 7-year mark, they come into freshwater ecosystems to spawn and die. And when they die, they take all those nutrients in their body that they've collected in a marine environment and deposit them in our freshwater environment. And that's actually really, really critical to our ecosystems here. These fish are invasive in some areas, like the Great Lakes or Lake Champlain, but they're native to the Connecticut River. So when we go to survey for sea lamprey, and this is happening actually this week and into next week, I believe. So right now, we're not actually looking for the fish themselves, we're looking for their nests. And this is partly because we don't want to disturb them while they're spawning. And the nests are pretty easy to identify. So on this chart here, you can see the flow of the river coming left to right. They will dig this little ditch here. Not dig, but they'll move these rocks into a big pile here. It's somewhat easy to identify these nests because most rocks have a layer of silt or sediment on top of them, but because they've been kind of picking up these rocks and moving them to build their nest, you can see the rocks are cleaner, and there's usually this inverted area before them, and that's where the fish spawns. So this is just, again, another sort of graph of how to identify these. If the river is coming left to right again, you'll find these nests at what we call the head of the riffle, and a riffle is just sort of a faster moving, rockier area usually, and that's where we identify these nests. And this is what it looks like in the field. So what we'll do is we'll have 2 or 3 people actually out in the water. Sometimes if the water is too deep or dangerous, we'll do it from the stream bank, but usually in the water, we spread out and we walk up the stream to see how many we can identify. Then we record the location, the GPS location, as well as where it's located within the stream. And we give that data to, again, state and federal agencies to supplement their own projects. And then down in the left or bottom right here is a picture of dead lamprey. And usually when we're doing the survey, the lamprey have all died. So it's not uncommon to see a couple dead lamprey during the survey. And I'll just tell you, they do not smell very good. So that's a quick overview of our migratory fish work. Most of that work will take place between April and towards end of June. I'll get into our water quality monitoring, which is a slightly longer season. We kicked it off at the end of May this year, and it includes a couple different projects. So our main project is called Is It Clean, or Este Limpo. And this is really intended to provide the public with information about if you can go boating or if you can go swimming. I think the Katharine Hepburn quote that gets tossed around quite a lot is that the Connecticut River is the best manicured or best landscape sewer system in the world. That's not quite it, but it has a reputation for having been a very dirty river. But in the last couple decades, the quality of the water in the river has improved drastically. So when I tell people that I swim in the Connecticut River, they're often surprised, but for the most part, especially here in Connecticut, the water quality is pretty good. What we do when we monitor water quality is we're looking at the bacteria concentration, and this is just E. coli. So if animals and humans can get sick from ingesting the water, and the main ways we evaluate that is, can you boat in it? So if you touch it, you're probably not getting it in your mouth, probably kind of safe. So there's a higher threshold for bacteria count. And then swimming. If you're swimming, the assumption is that there's potential for you to get the water in your mouth. And is that safe? Of course, this is not drinking water, so you should always try and avoid getting water in your mouth, but that's how we measure it. And is it clean happens on a weekly basis. So every Wednesday, we are updating these results and posting them to our website across all 4 states with a lot of different partners. And these numbers are from last year when we had to scale back a bit, but we've increased the number of sites and partners that we're working with. So these are our 2020 results, and I realize it's a little hard to see, but I'll just give a quick explanation. On the left, we have dry weather results, and on the right, we have wet weather. And the reason we differentiate is because bacteria counts tend to be higher in wet weather. So if it rains really hard, that rainwater sweeps everything that's on the surface into the river or into the stormwater drain and into the river. So it may seem counterintuitive, but water quality is actually often degraded after it rains. And then on the left, we have dry. So down here in Connecticut, it was almost always safe for swimming in dry weather. Some of these colored dots where it was usually or sometimes never safe are actually out on the Scantic River, not on the main stem. And then in wet weather, for the most part, it was still okay to swim with, I think this exception is maybe in Middletown, where the water quality was a little bit off on a few of those days. And then this is just one more look at those results. So we have added, I think, 3 sites to the main stem of the Connecticut River this year for sampling. But looking at all of these from 2020, it was always safe on the days we sampled to go for a swim. And actually Haddam is one of our top, I think maybe the highest quality site we have in the entire Connecticut River, including all 4 states. So we had great results there. So that's Is It Clean? I really encourage you to check it out. We are full up on volunteers for this year, but next year, we're really hoping to expand further south into areas like Chester and Essex, Old Saybrook and Old Lyme. There are some complications because of the change in salinity once you get down there, but it's a goal of ours to be working with new volunteers to get those water samples. And then I'll quickly talk about Sample Palooza. And actually, again, this picture is taken in Essex by someone on the Gateway Commission who participated last year. Sample Palooza is a 1-day synoptic event. So the purpose of this event is to get a snapshot of the river all at the same time. So we have all of these different sites. I can't remember, I think it's somewhere in the 40s again. And we have volunteers and we have partner organizations who go out all at the same time of day on the same day. They collect a sample and we process these samples in the lab. And we're looking at the nutrient levels, so phosphorus and nitrogen, because this affects how much oxygen is in the water. And then we looked at chlorides this year as well. So if that's something you would be interested in, we do like to continue to grow this project, and it's just a one-time commitment per year to see what the river looks like if you were to take a picture of it. And then the last water quality monitoring project I'll talk about is microplastics. So microplastics are just these tiny, tiny plastics. Sometimes they're visible to the eye, sometimes not. On the left, we have something here called nurdles. And nurdles are actually plastic pellets before they're made into the plastic product. So this could be used to make water bottles, for example. And nurdles are shipped all over the world. And subsequently, they are found littering beaches and rivers and water bodies all over the world, even really far inland. So we participate in an international project where volunteers go out, they're assigned to a site, and about twice per month, they spend just 10 minutes walking the shoreline, walking the riverbank to see how many nurdles they find in 10-minute increments, and then report that data so we get this sort of global database of where these nurdles are being found. And then on the right, we are working on another microplastics program where we take these water samples. This water sample will get pushed through a filter paper, and then volunteers will count the number of microplastics on that paper. So it's slightly different, happens under a microscope in the lab, but we're also hoping to expand that program into the future since, as far as we know, there's no other microplastic sampling happening yet on the river. All right, water quality monitoring, and I'm going to move into invasive species, and then I just have restoration after that. But before we get too far into invasives, I want to talk about what is an invasive species, why do we care about them? So this map on the right is showing the concentration of invasive species in the Connecticut River. As you can see, we have a lot. An invasive species is just a plant or an animal that's not native to the area. Sometimes non-native plants and animals are benign. They don't have a huge impact on the ecosystem and it's fine. What differentiates invasive species is that they can outcompete other native plants. They can overwhelm or alter an ecosystem. And so they have this negative impact on our local water bodies. In that way, they can create monocultures. So it may be the only thing that remains in that water body, which lessens the diversity in the ecosystem. But then on top of that, they're also can be so severe that they block access to the water. So it will clog these waterways, which of course means that people can't go fishing or boating there. And it's really, really expensive to treat, which as towns are increasingly developing their waterfront is of greater concern. So the first one I'll talk about two invasive species, water chestnut and hydrilla. Water chestnut is native to parts of Europe, and it was actually brought over to be displayed in a botanic garden, and then just spread to home gardens, and from there kind of exploded, especially across the Northeast. As you can see, it is kind of a pretty plant. It has these white flowers later in the summer. And what makes it really distinct, though, in addition to these rosettes, as we call them, with the forked or the toothed leaves, is it has a long feathery stem and then a nut or a seed that's rooted in the bottom. And that nut or seed, once it drops from the plant germinates, and once it drops, it can remain viable in the soil for up to at least 12 years, even if it doesn't produce more rosettes in those 12 years. So a long lifespan, a lot of monitoring to do. But in addition to that, it proliferates amazingly quickly. So this is the nut or the seed I was talking about. Another reason they're distinct is because they're very sharp. They can puncture your shoe. Someone told me it's possible to puncture your car tire. I've not tried to verify that myself, but I can tell you they're sharp. So if we have just one seed that gets into the water, it can create 15 of those rosettes. So 15 floating plants on the surface. Each plant will create in the season 20 more seeds. So when you multiply that, by the end of the season, you'll have 300 seeds from just one. So it grows so quickly. And this is what it looks like when it gets out of hand. This is not on the Connecticut River. This is actually in Lake Champlain. But as you can see, I was talking about that monoculture. It's really hard for native plants to grow under that or even within it. It's not very good habitat for fish species. And I mean, if you tried to cast a line into this, you would definitely not catch any fish. You can't go boating there. And to sort of prove that point, the state of Vermont has spent at this point well over $10 million just on this one infestation since the 80s. So it's really expensive. And then to sort of localize it, this is up in Hartford. So this here is the Connecticut River. This is a retention pond. So it's not directly connected to the river, but last summer, someone told me they saw a water chestnut seed, and so I was scoping it out online, and you see how it's blue on Google Maps, and then when you put on the filter for looking down at the global view, you can see, you know, if I just came across this on the map, I wouldn't even know that was a body of water. The water chestnut has so clearly overrun the entire thing, and this is what it looks like when I went in person. So these things become very overwhelming very quickly, which is why it is so important that we focus our resources and attention on prevention. So it's not an original thought, but it is true. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And this is my kayak on top of my car at Haddam Meadows. And there's actually some invasive hydrilla you can see right here on the launch. Every time I go into the river, I clean my boat when I get out. I make sure there's no water or plants or animals attached to it. And then before I go in the water again, I dry my boat because I know that I have the potential to spread invasive species. And it really only takes one for there to become a severe infestation. So we really focus on getting the message out there to clean your boat, drain it, and dry it, even your fishing gear, anything you bring into the water. Once we have plants established, we're not just going to let them sit there and continue to overrun the native ecosystem. So one thing we do at CRC is monitoring. If you're ever out on the river and you see water chestnut, we ask that people report it to us through an app called Water Reporter, which displays on a map here. So all of these points are areas where we have seen water chestnut. You can check, we might already know of the infestation, we might not, but that information will be displayed here. And then, sorry, this is a little bit blurry, but when you zoom in on that, you can report parameters like how severe was the infestation. You can take pictures to show or tell us if there are other plants mixed in with it. This helps us, because we do this in all 4 states, this helps us just have kind of a common platform on which we can tell people or share resources and also track the infestation across the whole river. Because as I said before, water chestnut is not going to abide by state borders. It travels very freely between all 4 states and all states in New England. So we're trying to make sure we're tracking this as it progresses and as we remove it. So another volunteer opportunity for those who are interested and able is to actually hand remove water chestnut. And we're thankful that this is a plant that you can do this for. It's kind of like weeding your garden, except for you do it from a canoe or a kayak. And we go out there in groups. We have some seasonal staff who help us with this. We paddle out and we reach down and you can kind of tug the plant out, and usually you'll get that nut at the bottom, which is great. It lets us know it's not going to grow again. We pull those out. But not everyone is comfortable doing that. So we have a couple other opportunities to pitch in on the water chestnut front, especially if you own a motorboat, because our volunteers end up filling up a lot of bags of water chestnut and need help transporting that to and from the sites rather than paddling back and forth. And then we're always glad to work with someone who's handy or has some resources to help us. So a volunteer last year made this platform to store the plants. And then once they're dry, they're really light and easy to transport. So these kind of drained out, and then we would bring them back before we dispose of them. All right, and the second invasive I promised to talk about, and we'll try not to keep try not to make too daunting, is the hydrilla. So on the left is a close-up picture of a fragment of hydrilla, and on the right is an infestation in the Mattabesett River, which is a tributary to the Connecticut River in Middletown. Hydrilla is another invasive species. Again, it proliferates really quickly. So the first time we even knew hydrilla was in the watershed was in 2016. And since then, following a survey that the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station did, they identified just under 800 acres of hydrilla in the river system. And that doesn't even include all of the coves and tributaries where they couldn't get access. So similarly to water chestnut, you can see where the river, how big the river is and how small the channels become because of the hydrilla. It grows up to 25 feet long. It's another name for it is water thyme, because people think it looks like thyme like you would cook with in your kitchen. And it's not good habitat for the native species. It outcompetes them. And a lot of boaters are telling us they can't even get to their boat slips. They can't go fishing because the hydrilla is so severe. So we're doing a couple different things. And I'm mentioning this, it's not as much of a volunteer opportunity, other than that we're asking everyone to take some time just to learn about hydrilla and share this information with your networks, with your friends and family, different groups that you're in, because that's where that clean, drain and dry, preventing the spread is really critical. So we are doing some pilot projects. On the top here is a blanket we've installed in Portland to see if this could suppress the growth. It's really experimental in nature. We don't know if this is going to work, but we're hopeful. Education and outreach. There's about a 15-minute documentary which has all the information you could hope for, and really some very beautiful footage of the river. So I'll send that to Mike and he can include it in the resource packet. And then we're advocating for funding to help create a task force to deal with hydrilla and ultimately treat it. So we recently asked Senator Blumenthal, or we're working with Senator Blumenthal to request $100 million over 4 years for the management of hydrilla, which is a big number, but far less than the economic costs of not being able to access the river for individuals and businesses and municipalities all. All right, and then restoration. So I talked a bit about human development, often having a negative impact on our local ecosystems. So where we can, we try to remediate some of these developments. That includes impediments to fish passage. The main ones are dams, as you see on the left, and culverts, as you see on the right. These both present obstacles to fish because we like to think that of that classic Atlantic salmon jumping up great heights to get over rocks and waterfalls, but in reality, a lot of fish can not make it that high. Definitely not as high as this dam, but even really not as high as this culvert here. So part of our work includes removing these obstacles. Where we can, we like to remove dams, remove culverts. Where we can't remove them, adding a way for fish to pass. So adding a ladder or an elevator. In the case of a culvert, this is a picture of a perched culvert, so it's up high, but they can be brought down so that the fish can more naturally get through those. And then once that's done, there's often a fair amount of stream bank restoration that needs to take place. So the river is returning to the way it naturally winds back and forth. But the stream bank may have eroded from how quickly the water is moving past the dam. So we do things like tree plantings, and then especially up in Vermont and New Hampshire, there was some old floodplain forest that was turned into farmland, and we're working to convert that back into floodplain forest, which provides good habitat, improves water quality, and then brings those benefits down to us in Connecticut. So we don't have anything ongoing right now for volunteer restoration opportunities, but if that's something you're interested in, we have an email list, and we're hoping to have opportunities for more tree plantings and that sort of thing. And then very last, I'm just going to briefly talk about Source to Sea. I'll be back to talk about that later, but our Source to Sea cleanup is again a watershed-wide cleanup. So all 4 states participating with a couple thousand volunteers, all within usually the same weekend in September. We have some priority items that we identify through Source to Sea. So going kind of left to right, we focus a lot on beverage containers, tires, and styrofoam docks as a part of our Stop Trash Before It Starts campaign. So the end goal of our cleanup is actually to stop doing the cleanup because there's no more trash in the river. We don't just want to go back every single year and take plastic bottles out of the river. We want, and for future generations, we want them to not even have to do this because we've stopped that flow of trash into the river. So with these priority items, we collect data whenever groups go out, and it doesn't just have to be for this event. Whenever individuals or groups go out, we ask them to count how many of each item they're finding. And then this actually really drives a lot of our advocacy work. So when I go to Hartford, I can say, hey, we found 15,000 plastic bottles in the river. We need legislation to make sure that we're stopping this flow of plastic into the environment. And then we also share this data with our partners across all states. So this is kind of old at this point, but we collected almost 70 tons of trash. Beverage containers, so cans and bottles and nips, are always the #1 item we find. Tires are up there as well, but this gives us sort of a snapshot of what took place. And then I'm just going to focus a little bit on tires because it's been top of mind for me, but I think presents one more opportunity to get involved as a demonstration for how to get involved in our advocacy work. So the top is really just going over again those numbers for how much trash we're finding. Mass quantities of trash, a lot of pounds of trash. And in 2019, a lot of that trash was tires. So we had over 1,200 tires reported in the Source to Sea cleanup. And these are very conservative numbers because honestly, a lot of volunteers don't send us their data. So we're finding tons of tires in the river because it's really expensive and difficult to get rid of tires. So individuals who don't want to pay a fee to get rid of their tires may just throw them on the side of the road or into the river or into a ravine. Or you and I might go get our tires changed. The tire store people give those tires to a hauler. They pay the hauler, usually $1 per tire. And then the hauler, instead of paying to have those disposed of, will just dump them illegally, which is how we get these huge pits of tires. And actually, I think I can't remember what town, but there was this infamous tire pond in Connecticut where someone had just been charging $1 per tire and he collected 4 million tires, which is just an environmental nightmare. And so since we've been counting tires, we've counted over 13,000, which again is pretty conservative. The impacts of this may seem kind of obvious. No one really wants a tire in their local stream or river, but it became even more clear to me the impact this last December when a paper came out that said a compound formed from tire dust was the sole cause of acute mortality in adult salmon, which is really quite rare. We see these chemicals killing juvenile fish species, but for a compound from tires to kill an adult fish is really says that these products are made with very toxic chemicals. So when they sit in the riverbed for a long time, they leach these chemicals into the river. They destroy habitats, and then they can also be a breeding ground for mosquitoes and vermin, which has a human health effect because if it's near you, you could catch those diseases. So we've been working on a piece of legislation called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. And EPR is really just a framework in which the companies that make the tires are required to participate in getting rid of the tires. So it kind of levels the playing field. It takes the burden of disposal away from consumers, towns, and volunteers, and puts that back on to the producers. We already have this in Connecticut for mattresses and paint. The idea being that you can just get rid of these things for free at no cost to you. So there's no incentive to throw them illegally into the river. And these work really well. We don't see as many mattresses as we used to in the river. People aren't dumping paint down the drain. So this is what we've really been pushing for tires before I got here. And I need to update this because we did introduce a bill this year. The session just ended a week or two ago, and the bill made it through the Environment Committee. It had really strong bipartisan support, but it was never voted on. So it just stalled out this year, and we'll have to keep working on it next year. As you can imagine, the producers themselves are pretty opposed to this bill. So it is a difficult fight, but one we think is really worth it for the health of our rivers. And the reason I'm talking about tires at all is mostly because I recognize a lot of the volunteer opportunities I've talked about are in the field, and not everyone wants to or can get out into the field. So if you are looking to protect your community, protect your local aquatic systems, one thing you can do is sign up for our emails and just learn about what legislative things or even what local ordinances we're pushing for. And then talk to your legislators or talk to your local town leaders. And I've heard from state legislators that when they hear from just 2 or 3 constituents on an issue, they consider it to be a really big deal because a lot of people aren't calling in. So just one more way to get involved. And that's it. Some information, my email here, or how to sign up, but I'm also happy to take any questions.
Kelsey, thanks so much. What a great presentation. So much information. I'm struck immediately by the vast amount of vital work that's being done by the Connecticut River Conservancy, done by you personally, and the impact that it has, the importance it has for all of us living in the lower Connecticut Valley. It's really important. Currently, I don't see any questions in chat. So I thought what I would do is just remind you about some forthcoming things while you have a chance to think of some questions, and then we'll come back to that in a moment. So while you're thinking of some questions, just a reminder that we'll be getting this resource packet out to you. That will include a link to the recording of this session. We'll include a lot of the links to a lot of the resources that Kelsey mentioned. I'm going to work with her to make sure that we get that water reporter link out there so that you can always refer to that if you see something that needs to be addressed. The other thing I'll let you know is that we already have scheduled several more seed sessions coming up. The next one coming up is on July 14th. That's going to be called the Connecticut River at Essex, a local history of thatched bed islands and the surrounds. It's being facilitated by Jeff Going, who is the chair of the Essex Harbor Commission, with some great information about how the river geographically has changed, geologically has changed over the years. Really a great presentation. So stay tuned for that. We also have a session coming up near the end of July on the 29th with an artist talk by a Chester artist, Kate Hare, which is going to be really tremendous. And then Kelsey kind of alluded to, stay tuned for information on the Source to Sea event. The good news is that we're planning a major Essex community-wide event, partnering with the River Conservancy and with Chelsea. We're going to have a kickoff seed event on August 17th. And then we anticipate, we're still in the planning stages of this, but we anticipate that we'll actually conduct that cleanup on Saturday the 25th. All of this information is out on our website. If you go to our website, click on upcoming events, you'll see links, you'll see a calendar with links to all of these forthcoming seed sessions so that you can click on those and pre-register if you want to at any time. That's all set up for you. Let me check chat and just see if there's anything out there. Still nothing left, nothing yet. We'll wait a couple more minutes. I also want to encourage you to, check out our website for additional information regarding our committee, and make sure you follow our Facebook page for regular updates. And the River Conservancy is they're a really valued partner for us. It's not necessarily a formal relationship, but it's one that has really kind of just been fostered by the belief that each organization, and the respect that each organization has for the other organization and the work that they're doing. So we'll make sure that you have a link directly to that organization, to the River Conservancy, and all these links that you see on the screen here. That'll all be in that resource packet. So I'll check one more time for chat. Nothing left, nothing yet. If you have any questions and I'm not sure where to go, if you think of something later, you can certainly reach out to our Sustainable Essex. You can email sustainableessex.org. We'll address that question. We'll get a hold of Kelsey if we need to. But also, as Kelsey mentioned, you can reach out directly to the Conservancy if you've got some questions regarding anything that Kelsey has covered. So Kelsey, I want to thank you once again for this has really been a great presentation. Tremendous amount of information, really, really vital work that you and the Conservancy are doing. I'm amazed at the breadth of it, and I'm really, one of the things that really strikes me is that the work of the volunteers with the data collection, with the fish monitoring, that data is then used and then forms the work you do at the legislative level. And I think that's really a crucial thing for all of us to remember. This is not just getting our boots wet, stepping in the water and pulling some weeds, but this really is turning into legislation that'll benefit all of us in the lower River Valley, over the next several years. So Kelsey, once again, thanks so much. We really appreciate you being here today. Appreciate your partnership. And if there are no other questions, we'll adjourn. I want to thank all of you who logged in for this event, and have a great day, and stay tuned again for future seed events coming up in July and August. Take care, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.